Have you ever thought about what the world was like before the flood? The epic disaster that changed the course of history. Imagine a time when Earth's laws were very different. It would have been like something out of a story, with people, nature, and the supernatural interacting in ways that we can only imagine from stories or old texts. How long did people really live before the flood? Interestingly, records from long ago, like the Bible, say that people could expect to live hundreds of years at that time. Adam was very old. He lived to be 930 years old. Methuselah, one of Adam's descendants, almost hit the 1,000-year mark. He lived to be 969 years old. The fact that they lived so long says that they lived in a very different world on Earth. They may have been covered by a layer of water vapor that kept the weather mild and stopped harmful radiations, giving them a good quality of life that let them live so long. Who were the Nephilim anyway? These mysterious people were written about in old books. People often think that the Nephilim are the result of an illegal union between the sons of God and the women of man. They are described as giants. The divine and humans interacted, creating a bloodline with amazing physical and spiritual traits. However, this lineage also brought corruption and violence, which eventually angered the divine. Before the flood, it was normal for God and people to talk to each other directly. People like Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel, Enoch, and Noah not only lived, but they also talked to God. God not only talked to them, but he also led them and sometimes scolded them. This made the connection between the heavenly and the physical seem much more real, a situation that would be very different after the flood. The water vapor layer theory is not just a guess. It gives a good reason for the consistently mild and humid weather, and some experts back it as a way to explain the perfect conditions before the flood. When this layer broke, it would have unleashed the flood's heavy rains, which would have completely changed the Earth's climate and, in turn, life on the surface. Also, the society, morals, and faith of the time before the flood were very different. Even though people at that time were older and wiser, they were said to be morally and spiritually decaying, which led to the final heavenly judgment. There are also descriptions of technologies and knowledge from this time that, if taken at face value, point to a level of understanding and control over nature and spiritual rules that is beyond our current understanding. Exploring the world of the Paleolithic isn't just a way to satisfy your historical or religious interests. It's also a way to find out how environments can deeply and permanently change societies. The stories about this time make us think about how the environment, technology, faith, and morals all interact with each other, and how these four things can affect people's lives. Therefore, when we think about these stories and the things they leave behind, they ask us to look into both the past and the possible futures of our society. The past of the world before the flood is more than just a lead-up to it. It's like a mirror that shows us lost parts of ourselves and our world. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you liked learning about how Noah and his family started life over on Earth and what rules God gave them. This kind of material helps us understand our past and what the Bible says. Feel free to leave a super thanks if this story moves you and you want to support this work. We can keep telling more Bible stories and spreading this message of faith and hope thanks to your donation. Thank you so much for your help, as the story of this amazing event is told again. After the flood that changed the Earth's shape, a figure appeared that went beyond the past and changed both heaven and earth. One angel stood out. Lucifer, also called the morning star, was the chosen cherub whose job it was to cover God's throne with his beautiful wings. He was the head of the angels and could easily connect with God, but his heart was filled with pride, envy, and an unquenchable desire to become God. Because he felt so bad, Lucifer was able to get a third of the other angels to join him in rebelling against God's rule. This uprising not only shook the skies, but it also set the stage for a spiritual war that will last forever between the realm of holy light and the realm of shadows, which is led by Lucifer, who is now known as Satan. After being kicked out of heaven with his followers, who were now demons, Satan went to the newly made earth to find a new fight. After seeing how God made Adam and Eve, who were made in his image, the lost one saw a chance to question God again. He saw the earth as his domain and the first humans as guests in his kingdom. Satan was very smart, so he used the snake, which is one of the smartest animals God made, as his tool. He made Eve question herself by telling her that if she and Adam ate the forbidden fruit, they would be like gods and know what is good and bad. Eve gave in to the temptation because she thought she could learn such things. She then persuaded Adam to eat the fruit that would kill them both. Not only did that disobedient act cut them off from their Creator, but it also took away their youth and sent Satan, who is now called the Prince of this world, to rule the earth. This is when sin became common among people, bringing death, pain, suffering, and a whole host of other bad things. It was the start of a story of fall and salvation that would continue for generations. The story of Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve's first sons, is one of the oldest examples of how deeply people can be evil and how complicated God's justice can be. Cain, a farmer, only gave God the fruits of the earth without any real spiritual commitment. Abel, a shepherd with a good heart, gave God the best animals from his stock. God accepted Abel's sacrifice, but not Cain's. This made Cain angry and jealous, and he killed 3 brothers in the first known act of fratricidal violence. In response to God's question about where his brother was, Cain showed the famous lack of interest. "I'm not sure." But even as Cain was being put to death, God showed kindness by giving him a mark that would keep him from being punished. So he lived even though he had done bad things. This series of events not only set the stage for the ongoing battle between good and evil, but it also showed how justice, kindness, and forgiveness will always be important in the biblical story. Each character and action in this deep and complicated story is a reflection of the inner and outer battles that all people face. This is a theme that we will keep exploring as we read the tale, from the beginning to the end. Cain moved to the land of Nod, which is east of Eden, after being kicked out of God's presence. There, Cain found a chance to start over, even though he was still feeling bad about killing and running away. He married a woman, most likely one of his sisters or nieces, because that's how people lived when the earth was first formed. They had a son together, whose name was Enoch. To honor Enoch, Cain built the first city in history, which shows how organized and strong he was. However, Cain's family tree was unique, not only because of its social successes, but also because it gradually moved away from God's good qualities. His children and grandchildren included Jabal, who raised nomads and herders, and Jubal, who played the harp and flute and was the first singer. For his part, Tubal-Cain was a great metal worker who specialized in copper and iron. Naamah, the only woman in this family, carried on the work of her ancestor and made some kind of cultural contribution during her time. But it was Lamech, the son of Tubal-Cain, who best showed how the Cain family lost their morals. Lamech not only married more than one woman, but he also killed a man and a young man and said it was for payback, which was a much stronger reason than the divine protection God had promised Cain. This cocky statement he made to his wives, Ada and Zillah, showed how far society had gone from God's ways and how it praised violence and going against the rules. At the same time, Ada and Eva were still sad about losing Abel, but they found comfort in having another son, whom they named Seth, which means substitute. Set stood for a new hope, a revival of the good family line that Abel would have carried on. His children and grandchildren were Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and finally Noah. A line of men who, unlike Cain's descendants, tried to keep their connection with the Creator strong and respect it. Enoch, who was the seventh person in the line of Seth from Adam, was known for being very religious. In a time when sin and moral decline were common, Enoch had such a close relationship with God that he never died. He was taken to himself by God. Enoch's life shone like a beacon in the rising darkness. It showed that he was a prophet who spoke of God's punishment on the wicked and hope for the good. On the other hand, the world kept going downhill. Corruption and violence spread so far that they touched every part of people's lives. Families turned into battlegrounds, evil grew in everyone's heart, and God's creation looked so bad that he cried a lot over it. According to the Bible, people's ideas and desires were always turning towards evil. As God looked out at this view, his heart was filled with sadness. He was picked because he was honest and pure in a time when evil was common. Noah's life, in which he prepared for the coming disaster, the flood, shows how hope and faith can survive in the middle of chaos. Similar to Seth's family tree, the story of Cain and his children teaches us not only about the effects of sin and revolt, but also about the chance to be forgiven and start over. There have always been people in the dark who decided to walk with God. Their lives showed others the way to truth and justice when things were bad. God had to make a hard but necessary choice. He had to wipe out all living things he had made, including birds, reptiles, and people. This was because injustice and violence were getting worse in the world. But in this empty landscape, there was one man who stood out for being honest and righteous: Noah. Because he was good, God accepted this man and picked him to protect the seed of life during the coming disaster. As a very important task, God gave Noah the job of building an ark that would protect his family and animals from every species. Following God's instructions, Noah built the huge boat, which was 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. He used gopher wood, which is known for being strong and resistant to water. The ark, which was covered on the inside and outside with pitch, was meant to hold about 40,000 animals and enough food for everyone to eat during the storm. In addition to building the ark, Noah spent a lot of time teaching, which was just as important. For 120 years, Noah told his people that the end of the world was coming and urged them to turn away from their sins. His warnings were not taken seriously, unfortunately. People made fun of Noah by calling him crazy and religious because he couldn't understand how bad the disaster was going to be. They went on with their lives, shocked that the sources of the great void would suddenly open and fill the earth with water from heaven, turning it all into a huge ocean. People were caught off guard, like the day of judgment came out of nowhere. They didn't know that the only way to be saved was to join the ark by faith. Noah, his family, and the animals that God had chosen got into the ark at a time that God had set. When God shut the door, he sealed the fate of everyone outside the ark. After 7 days, it started to rain heavily. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and water rose from below and above, keeping God's word to clean the land of its sin. The water quickly rose and covered the mountains and hills. God's building skills were truly amazing, and the ark sailed safely above the waves that hit the earth. Outside, Noah and his family had to deal with the physical challenge of staying alive in a world that was now underwater. They also had to deal with the mental and spiritual challenges of being the last people on earth and the guardians of a new beginning. It was over a year that Noah, his family, and the animals lived in the ark as it sailed across the ocean. They took care of each other and the animals during that time, which kept the fight for life and hope alive. Everything that breathed life outside the ark died. Noah had a lot of time to think. He thought about how he had to rebuild the world and set up a new order based on the standards of justice and fairness that God had taught him. At last, the water started to go down. When the ark finally stopped on the Ararat Mountains, the land could be seen again in small chunks. Noah sent a crow and then a dove to see if the water level was low enough for them to leave the ark. Noah knew the land was ready for people to move back in when the dove came back with a fresh olive leaf in its beak. When the water went down, Noah opened the ark's door and walked into a new world with his family and the animals. When Noah got out of the ark, the first thing he did was build an altar and make offerings to God to show his thanks for his kindness and power. God then blessed Noah and his boys and promised not to flood the earth again. He also made the rainbow as a sign of this permanent promise between God and all living things. So the story of Noah and the flood isn't just about guilt and damage, it's also about starting over and having hope. When Noah got out of the ark, he became the new leader of all people. He was told by God to lead his family and all living things on a journey of healing and forgiveness. After 150 days of being alone, Noah and his friends stayed in the ark as the water that had been covering the earth began to recede. Noah had to deal with a lot of trouble, but his faith never wavered. In his care, God did not forget about Noah. He sent a wind over the earth that sped up the drying process. The rivers of the deep and the windows of heaven shut, and it stopped raining. In the 7th month of the flood, when the water had gone down, the ark finally came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The land kept drying out, so Noah and his family had to wait a few more months. In the 10th month, the mountain tops showed up, which was a good sign that their long confinement was coming to an end. Noah didn't open the window he had made in the ark for another 40 days. In order to check if the land was dry, he first sent a raven, which went back and forth until there were no more seas. Noah then sent out a dove, but it couldn't find a place to land, so it flew back to the ark. After 7 more days, Noah let the dove fly again. This time, it came back at dusk with a new olive leaf in its beak, which was taken as a false sign that plants were starting to grow again and the water level had dropped a lot. Because he felt better, Noah waited 7 more days before sending the dove out a 3rd time. He knew there was life outside the ark because the water had dried up enough for it not to come back. After that, Noah took off the ark's cover and saw for himself that the ground was free of water. The ground was totally dry on the 27th day of the 2nd month. This marked the end of one era and the start of a new one. After that, God told Noah to leave the ark with his family and all the animals that had been saved. "Come out of the ark, you and your wife, your sons and their wives with you," God said. Then Noah, his family, and all the animals from birds in the sky to animals that crawl on the ground got out of the ark. They were ready to bring new life to the world that had been destroyed. Noah was deeply and immediately thankful that the Lord had saved him. He built an altar to the Lord and burned all the clean animals and birds he had brought as sacrifices. The Lord was pleased by the smell of the offerings, so he made a serious promise. "I'm not going to blame the ground anymore because people's hearts have been bad since they were young. I will never again kill all living things like I did." God made a new promise that set up a new relationship between himself and the world he made. He said that there would be crop time and harvest time, cold and hot, summer and winter, day and night, as long as the earth lasts. These words gave people hope that, even though people made mistakes, life on earth would go on because God was always watching. God also blessed Noah and his kids and told them to have many children and live long. He gave them new rules, one of which was that they couldn't eat blood, which is the life of the body. Noah and his family would eat anything that moves or lives, just like they had eaten green plants before. It was also at this time that the link between people and the rest of creation changed. God said, "All the animals on the earth and all the birds in the sky will be afraid of you." This showed a new dynamic in the natural order, where people clearly had power over animals and were responsible for running creation fairly. The land was dry, and Noah and his family knew that God would bless them. They then started to rebuild. They would start a new society based on divine rules and promises. This would happen in a world that was marked by judgment, but also had hope and renewal. The story of Noah's life, from building the ark to the start of a new world, shows how faith and persistence can help you get through the worst problems. There was a new order on earth after the flood. Noah, the founder of the new humanity, got clear directions from God on how to live together and keep the species alive. After Noah and his family brought new life to the earth, the Creator made rules for how people should interact with the rest of creation. The law that said people couldn't kill each other was one of the most important ones. God said, "Certainly, I will demand their blood, the blood of their lives. This life will come from the hand of every animal, and it will come from the hand of every man and every one of his brothers." This law stressed how precious life is because it was made in God's image. Someone would have to shed their own blood as a punishment if they didn't respect this holy character by killing people. This principle showed that God was fair and that keeping life and moral order in the world after the flood was very important. God also told Noah and his children and grandchildren to have many children and grandchildren. This gift reminded Adam and Eve of the original command that God gave them in the Garden of Eden. It showed that God's plan for people has not changed. God made a promise to Noah, his boys, and all the living things that were with them. The earth was then renewed, and God's promises were kept. The promise in this treaty was that God would never again drown the world and kill all living things. To make sure they would always be together, God showed them a beautiful sign called the rainbow. If the rainbow were in the sky, it would always remind us of the deal that God made with the earth. God said, "The rainbow will show up in the clouds when I bring clouds over the earth. Following that, I will remember the promise I made to you and all living things. Also, the water won't turn into a flood that kills everyone. After it rains, the rainbow's bright colors splash across the sky. It would be a sign of hope and rebirth, showing that God is merciful and still cares for his creation." As Noah and his family watched the rainbow appear for the first time, they were greatly touched by its beauty and meaning. It was a time of deep respect and thanksgiving. They understood that even though people can be bad, God had promised to keep life going and give people new chances to grow and be saved. Over time, Noah's children and grandchildren started to discover the earth and bring new people to it. The generations that came after them moved to new places and started new cultures and towns. Each family had something that told them of God's rules and promises, and the rainbow in the sky often showed that God was always there, watching over everyone. So the story of Noah and the flood is more than just a story about destruction. It's a story about starting over and how strong the human spirit can be when things go wrong. It's also the story of how God, who is infinitely wise and caring, chooses to step into history to fix things and protect creation. Noah's story not only sets the stage for future generations, but it also teaches us a strong lesson about our duty to care for the world and each other. One of the most important things about being human is being able to start over and rebuild after disaster. A trait that will be necessary for life and success for hundreds of years to come. That's why the rainbow is still a sign of promise and hope. It reminds us of God's promise not to flood the earth again and of his endless will to forgive and rebuild every time it shows up in the clouds. It's a sign of God's grace, which accepts people as they are, flaws and all. The story of the flood and the rainbow ends with a promise of peace and healing that lasts forever. Noah is saved, and the earth is made new. As Noah's children and grandchildren continued to settle the earth, they took with them the knowledge that God's promise would stay a rock for their lives and the lives of future generations. The story of Noah is not only about surviving and starting over, but it is also a deep look at what people are like and how faithful God is. It tells us that every ending leads to a new beginning, and every act of damage leads to a chance to start over and grow. These are the things that the flood left behind. The story of the flood has taught us that life is both fragile and strong, and that there is always hope, even when things look the worst. In this way, the story of Noah and the flood doesn't end here. It lives on and inspires people all over the world. Our trip through the story of Noah and the Great Flood is now over. I hope this story has moved you and changed the way you think about God's promises and loyalty. Please share this movie with your family and friends if it touched you. This story gives people hope and a fresh start. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. How did you feel when you read today's moving Bible story? Thank you for following us to the end of this incredible story. See you in the next video. May God be with you always. Amen.